welcome. Thank you guys, everyone, for joining. Panel discussion about working in tech at a startup. So we have 4 panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves now. Why don't we go in alphabetical order, starting with first name, just to make it easy since we're not in an actual panel line like normal. So Carl, you can kick us off with an introduction, just your name, your position, the company you work for, a little company, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Carl Newell. I am the co-founder and CIO of LenderLogix. We are a local startup that focuses in the mortgage space. So our software products we sell are mainly geared towards lenders of mortgages, and we kind of focus on what are called independent mortgage bankers. So I wish I would have worn my UB shirt because I am also a grad, which I'm assuming a bunch of you guys are, so I feel left out.
Awesome. Cool.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liesel, and I am the co-founder and CTO of Lita Health. We are a company building tools and resources for sexual assault survivors. Our core product, or our first product that we are bringing to market, is an at-home sexual assault evidence collection kit. And excited to answer any questions you guys have moving forward.
Awesome. Nick?
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Nick. I also am a UB grad. I lead the infrastructure team at Modern Health. Before that, I worked at another later stage startup called Optimizely for a number of years. And yeah, I'm excited for the panel this morning. This will be fun.
Awesome. Cool. Wendy?
Hi guys, my name is Wendy Sagline. I'm a software engineer at M&T Bank, which is clearly not a startup, but I am coming fresh off of a startup. For the last 4.5 years, I was at Sentience, which is a startup in downtown Buffalo. And I am also a UB grad, so rounding out the crowd.
Cool. So I have some questions for you guys. I'd also like the audience to participate. So if you guys have any questions for the panelists, just send them in the chat and we'll get to them as they come in. But let's get started. So why don't we start with an infrastructure question? So what's been your experience with scaling infrastructure as you grow to support more traffic and like a larger engineering team? Has it been like positive, negative? And what would you change if you could redo it?
This one's an obvious one for Nick, right? He said he leads an infrastructure team. We'll let him be the expert on it, and I'll lead him off with some low-hanging fruit. At Sentient Science, this was like, I think if I had to pick just thing I learned technically, it was the value of investing in like push-button infrastructure, right? Infrastructure as code. We started with like mostly manual setup in AWS. And the team was tiny and the resources were tiny. It was okay. But then as the team started to get bigger and as the resources started to grow, we also started taking on some government contracts. So we had some special work that had to be done in US Gov Cloud and AWS. It got really unmanageable. There was a big security incident that I won't go into details about, but it was not good. And we came out of it doing Terraform. And Terraform was life-changing. Terraform is a tool that lets you write code to declare what your infrastructure is going to be. And that was just such a step jump, not only in productivity now, because a lot of the infrastructure tasks before that felt very repetitive, felt like it was very low return, or like if you did your job perfectly, no one noticed, but if you messed it up, it was not good. So Terraform really helped with that. And we ended up growing away from Terraform because we were AWS specific. So we moved to the AWS specific tool that they offer, which is CloudFormation and CDK. But we had a wonderful experience with infrastructure as code. It made me interested in infrastructure more than I had been, because before then I was very like, I just want it to work. I want to write the code. But once the infrastructure was code, it was a lot more fun. So it was a great experience. I think it was actually my #1 technical takeaway from my time at Sentient.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah, plus 1,000, Wendy. Like, yeah. I think like so yeah, in our case at Modern Health, like we're scaling pretty rapidly. Like over what is it like since lockdown, like since quarantine started in March, we've like doubled like the number of users that we've been working with, and so it's like really exciting. And so for us, like it's been a positive experience. Like we uh, sorry, so we're also built in AWS. We run Docker. We run on ECS for container management. So it allows us to like horizontally scale as needed. And overall, I'd say like it's been a really positive experience for me. We also use a lot of Terraform to manage a whole bunch of things. And what's interesting about our business is that like we can forecast increase in traffic based off of like the number of people who work at a company. So Modern Health is like a mental health benefit for businesses, and so like we sell to other businesses, and so we can use that to understand the employee base and then determine like conversion rates from that, and then understand like the registered users. So then we can forecast like what simulated load we should be running at in like a non-production cluster to understand if our production needs increased capacity or not. So we take like a fairly scientific approach, which is pretty fun. So yeah, that was the infrastructure question. Were those all of them, Liam? I think there was something around engineering teams too, or no? Did I miss something?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you scale, how do you support that, that growth in your engineering team with your like even your internal tooling?
Definitely rely on infrastructure as code, right? Like, so, and you parameterize a lot of the things that you know you're going to be changing, like what region are you deploying it to, or what account are you deploying it to? But definitely infrastructure as code. I can't imagine scaling without that. And when I was at Sentient, we didn't scale dramatically in terms of customer base. It was really just employees that we scaled in terms of, and couldn't have done it without infrastructure as code.
Awesome.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing, Liam, if that's okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so like what Wendy's saying for sure. And I'm also thinking this question like from like the general engineering team also, and like the company overall. And like at a startup, like your infrastructure might not be like your core competency. So, but like you still need people to like manage like how things get shipped. And like the way that I think that you can really enable like more people to like feel more empowered with like what's going on is to like give them deep context on like product areas. So like as you scale your team and you scale your feature set, like you give people like more like clear lines of ownership, and then you like adopt DevOps as a culture. So I don't know how many folks are familiar with like DevOps, but there's this really great book called Accelerate. If you're not familiar with it, you should totally read it. And but yeah, I mean, like with those things, like you really set up people to own things end to end from like conception to production and like maintenance, and that those things will like allow you to like scale your engineering team. So I mean, there's like that question alone could be like a whole hour-long conversation. So I'll be quiet and we can go on to the next one. Good question.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, guys. So next question. So historically, engineering in startups has been categorized by like major collaboration, kind of like boots on the ground attitude. I think this shift to remote work has kind of impacted this. You guys feel like it's harder to get stuff done, or maybe even easier?
Yeah, let me take that one. So at Lita Health, we're building both software as well as hardware. On the hardware side, we're building a tamper-evident device that can be used by a user at home, and once they sort of seal the device, they cannot reopen it, and only an authorized user, such as a lab, can reopen the device. So before the pandemic started, I would be down at the proto shop maybe twice a week, every week, like learning how to use the laser cutters, 3D modeling tools and whatnot, and really creating rapid prototypes every other day. But then right I think the second week of March, when everything closed, we were two different accelerators. One was Alchemist Accelerator in San Francisco and the NYU Tandon School of Engineering, through which I had free access to Photoshop. Everything closed. So we actually had to put a halt on the hardware side for the past few months. So it definitely impacted the way that we operated in some shape or form. I mean, we did digital prototyping and whatnot, but like in terms of really getting hands-on, we were really severely impacted.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'll give my 2 cents on this. For us, it really wasn't much of a change. So we're 100% software business. The really biggest change was getting used to working from your house versus working from your office. So for us, it wasn't much of a change. It was just making sure our tooling was correct for the collaboration that you're gonna be shifting from in person to an entirely virtual collaborative environment. So using Google Meet or using Zoom and Slack, and just making sure that that conversation is continuing, whatever that medium is really the biggest change for us. But outside of a couple growing pains, I would say in early to late March and a little bit in April, it's been it's great. I actually kind of like it. I'm not wasting 35 minutes each morning and each afternoon driving to and from the office, which gives me a little extra time to do some stuff. So I can't complain at all.
Awesome. Cool. Any other input on this one? We can move to the next one.
I just have a word of advice for anyone who is managing a software team or on a software team. I was at Sentient Science during the pandemic transition, and we already had a culture of pair programming in place. And I think that did a lot to break the ice about like informally reaching out to coworkers, right? Because like most of us will Google, will Stack Overflow before we go to people, even in an office. But when you're at home, it's really easy for that to become like almost an obsession, where like you'll sink 45 minutes into like deep dive research by yourself. When in an office, you would have after 10 minutes walked over. If your team is already in the habit of pair programming, I felt like the people that I regularly pair programmed with, it was very seamless for us to continue asking each other for help and reaching out, even when we were all working from home. But the teammates that I didn't pair program with, there was a noticeably lower incident of like working together on something, problem solving. So I would say pair programming is a really good practice to help your team break the ice. And there is a company, a startup out of Boston, I believe. It's called Tuple or Tuple. We won't argue about the pronunciation, but Tuple has a really great guide if you have never pair programmed before. I'll put the link in the chat in a little bit.
Awesome. Cool. All right, so we'll move to the next one. So for those of you who have gone from like a large company to a smaller startup, vice versa, what would you say like the biggest difference? Why did you make that switch, either one way or the other?
So I can kind of this one. So my prior experience prior to was mainly in what I'd say medium to large businesses. So I used to work in the defense contracting space, and those are massive companies with branches or divisions all over the country and or the globe. And then previously I worked for Healthcare Payer as well, which is another big type of entity. The biggest, I think, change or the biggest difference from my experience between those type of environments and working at a startup is the velocity at which things happen and move. So we're able to do things in a quicker iterative approach than you would be at one of those bigger companies. There's a lot less, I would say, red tape that you don't have to go through at a startup that you do probably at a bigger entity. It's just the nature of as things get bigger, there's more processes and procedures that have to be followed and whatnot as you want to move stuff through an environment. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
Cool. I know, Wendy, you've moved from small to big, so the kind of the opposite direction. What would be your input on this?
And I actually have, I guess you could describe it as a mountain or a valley, but I did a co-op at Moog full-time as a student for about 1.5 years, and then Sentient Science, the startup, and now I'm at M&T. I definitely second what Carl mentioned. Usually in the startup environment, the distance between like noticing a problem and being in charge of solving it is like almost non-existent, right? Like at Sentient Science, it would literally same day, where it's like, hey, the process for how we're working with this one customer about this one thing, I don't think it's up to snuff. And then by the end of the day, they were like, great, you're in charge of it. So in a lot of ways that was great. And sometimes it was also overwhelming too. You really had to know your own limits for burnout. I think that's something that might be the biggest difference for me. Working at a large established company versus a startup, you have to be intimately aware of your own work-life boundaries. Like, what are the things that just make you just mad unhappy? Like for me, if I am slacking after 7 p.m., I'm just not a happy person. I can slack at 5 a.m. I am okay, right? But like late at night in quotes, I'm a grandma, it was just hard for me. So knowing your own boundaries, but on the other hand, again, waking up at 5 a.m. wouldn't burn me out. So learning those, it definitely was a steep learning curve. In hindsight, I'm glad I learned those boundaries, but I think for me, that was the biggest difference between them.
Cool. Sweet. Any other input on that one?
I have something small to add to this. So in terms of working, even with us as a startup, working with other startups actually has been fairly easier than trying to work with larger companies or public organizations because they have so many processes that they have to go through. So we've actually found it fairly easier and quicker and more efficient to work with smaller startups because they're trying to get traction, because they're trying to, improve upon what they have currently built. So that's my 2 cents on this.
Cool. All right. So next question. This one kind of, I think, applies to everyone here, but what's something you guys wish you knew before working at a startup for your first time?
I can take that one first. So at Lita Health, something that I originally, backtracking a little bit, all the way back actually, I originally come from Nepal, which is like halfway across the world. I am not political. I barely used to read the news. Before starting this company, I did not know how political what we're building at Lita could get. And that has been quite interesting and shocking and just like eye-opening for me.
Cool. Yeah, I can't even imagine like, but it's awesome that you're taking on like that problem and like
yeah, despite the political, sadly political nature of it, it's good.
Yeah, it's much overdue.
Definitely.
I don't know, from my perspective, to answer your question, Liam, and it's related to what Wendy was just saying around boundaries. Like, just knowing your boundaries and your needs is like really important because, like, I mean, people always say like, your career is like largely on you, but like in a startup, like your job is also like just like getting your job done is also on you because like everyone has important work to do. Like, so everyone's trying to figure out like how do we keep doing all this important work. So like learning to say like no, not yet on work, like in a kind way where you can figure out like why it's important and figure out the right priority of that thing to do later, and like being able to ruthlessly focus and prioritize focus on like the right thing and then prioritize like the follow-up stuff. Like I wish I like knew that stuff when I joined, because I've had to like basically learn that extremely fast to become like effective or more efficient, I guess, at my job. So that's definitely one of them. And then the other is also related to the space. Like I'm really passionate about mental health care, but I just didn't realize how complex healthcare is. Like in this country, it's like crazy. Like there's like the HIPAA regulation stuff, and then there's also just like the whole insurance side of it that like it just takes a lot of effort to like make sure that you're compliant, and it needs to be baked into your foundation. So like those things are like really interesting learnings in hindsight.
I think for me, they're related, and they're actually about coworkers and enjoying relationships with coworkers. Um, I learned that like pretty much the number one predictor of how happy I was that month at work was how well my team was getting along with each other. Especially in a small environment, like even really small friction can become really unnecessarily large. So I learned probably after the first year that like every small investment you make into team rapport, it'll come back to you at least tenfold. It's very easy to have like a go, 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 almost like bordering on the we don't turn off culture. But it's really important to like get your team a breakfast pizza if you're in person, or like call them just to catch up with no work content during work hours when you're all remote. Little things like that, they make a really big difference for team rapport, and they show up in weird places. Like when you're doing that, your architecture conversations get easier, even though they're not supposed to be related, but they totally are. Like if you've been asking about how your coworkers' kids are, they're less likely to attack an architecture idea out of left field their teammate, the teammate who didn't ask about. It makes a big difference. So that was a big takeaway. I do think my first year would have been a lot more fun if I had picked up on that. I think I was very concerned with like showing up and looking professional and looking, uber competent. I was very concerned with that my first year. So, I didn't make a lot of time for things like that, but it really improved the whole team, not just my relationships, my enjoyment of the job. The architecture conversations became noticeably better when we had a better team rapport going. So that was a really big one for me.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest thing for my prior experience and then coming into this type of experience was the shift of large organization to small organization, and then the things that kind of go along with that. So large organization, you kind of have your day, it's generally core business hours. It's, 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. to 5 or 4 or whatever it is. So going from that type of more structured environment to a more kind of freewheeling, work when you need to work, get your stuff done type of environment, and how to manage your time and when you need to do things, along with other things going on in your life. I think that was probably my biggest thing I wish I would have been more aware of when I started off.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks, guys. All right. So this one's more, this next question is kind of in terms of like processes as you grow. So with smaller startups, there's a lot looser structure when it comes to different processes, such as, a new feature from just like concept to, getting it out to production. So what kind of pipelines have you guys seen put in place? What kind of worked? What didn't work? Any input on that?
So I can talk a little bit about what our processes are here. So when we kind of started building our code and our product base, we were utilizing Bitbucket as our source code repository. Eventually, they started introducing pipelines into that, and it just really wasn't working for us. So we made a switch to GitLab probably about 2 years ago now, and we've been full-blown GitLab 100% since then. So what does that get you, right? So GitLab is, it's a source code repository, and I don't mean this to be a commercial for GitLab, but we're very happy with what they provide and their service. So we originally, just were using the code repository, then we started branching out and using their CI/CD platform. Recently, we started using their approval process, came up with our own kind of branching structure and code workflow inside of there to move, a change set from a development environment all the way up to our production environment. With approvals built in, different people have to review things. So that's kind of how our evolution was. So I would say that it kind of was a little bit rudimentary at first. And then as we've, grown and increased our, capacity, things have changed, and they've changed in a good way where there's a little bit more structure in there. A lot of stuff is automated via their pipeline process, whether it's, code review happening automatically, some sort of unit testing being done automatically, and then all the deployments to the environments is done. So that's kind of been our experience. And, I can't say enough about the GitLab product and what it provides you to do a lot of that orchestration that takes a lot of manual things and makes them automated.
Awesome. Cool. Anyone else have anything to add to that? Cool.
Hey, you actually, sorry, I was looking for my
Oh yeah,
unmute.
go for it.
It's related to what Carl said. We had a big improvement in our human bust factor, like how many software engineers feel comfortable fixing something when it goes wrong, goodness forbid, in production, or even just like if there's a ticket, who feels comfortable picking it up. We had a lot of good improvements when we started doing code reviews. So we had like a branching strategy, right, where you had a branch for a feature or a ticket. And then when you were branching into master, you had to have a code review. And we have a template in our repository. Most like GitLab, GitHub, Azure DevOps even, they let you have a template for like what questions do you run through. You have to provide a link to the ticket if you have a ticketing system. We found that to be really helpful. Usually the shyer devs, it would encourage them to reach out to have somebody else read through their code, and just reading through the code made you feel better about picking up a round of work for that particular area the next time. So I would highly recommend not only code reviews for your team, but a template to guide it that's part of your source control.
Just to add another point to that too, like one of the things that's great about any of these systems is that history is there. So new person comes on the team, then look back at all those different code reviews that happened, any sort of merge requests, the comments that are in there, that's all there for them as, you know, a starting place, which is a good thing. When you have someone new come on, it, you know, increases that ramp, or, you know, makes that ramp up time less and allows them to kind of get up to speed a lot quicker.
And so while we're talking about like code pipeline, something that we added recently is we use this tool called Semantic Release out of the JavaScript community. And what it allows you to leverage on your messages for your merge requests or your pull requests is prefixes. So like, is this a feature? Is this a bug fix? Is this a breaking change? And then our CI pipelines will automatically tag the release with the right semantic version based off of like what's been contributed. And then that outputs to automatically a Slack that tells us like what are the new features in this release, what are the bug fixes in this release, and we also include like the link as a part of the MR title. We also use GitLab, Carl, actually. So and so then like when that gets outputted to Slack, you have all the context for all the relevant like interested parties. Like you have the Jira tickets for the product manager, everyone else. So we found that to be a pretty useful like a code process change.
Cool. All right. I guess branching off that a little bit, I'm curious. When you have a small dev team, you can try to test your code as best, but you know, stuff still gets through. What have you guys found like the best way for quality assurance? Like, how do you maintain that? Do you guys have like a small dedicated quality assurance team? Do you guys have like automated smoke testing? Have you guys found to work the best? No, Nick, you mentioned you might have something on this one, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak to this a little bit, and I think it like depends on like where you are in your stage as a company. Like for us, like we have a pretty complex, like we have like 2 member facing apps, 1 mobile, 1 web, a provider facing app, internal app. Like, so it's like pretty important that all things are working together. So we have a small dedicated QA team. We have a QA lead. She's amazing. Like having somebody be able to like focus on quality assurance is like a responsibility, and that strategy is like really helpful. And it goes back to like, well, all these things that we were talking about before around automation, like how much of it automate and make easy so that like the guardrails are in place for like safe decisions and high quality decisions to be made like as the default. So a bunch of tools that we use like Rainforest Q for a bunch of things, and we're starting to automate a whole lot of things using Puppeteer and Detox for mobile. And obviously we have like well, maybe not obviously, but we have like a fairly comprehensive set of unit tests. But it's also like making sure that like as an org, like there's like an understanding of like good coverage means, and that you're like measuring these things over time, and that you're constantly investing in it. And like, I don't know, for my like code is kind of a liability. So like once you're starting to like build stuff, like when you're shipping new features, like don't put off writing tests. Like ship it with with like odds are you're going to get distracted because you're at a startup and there's so many things happening that you're not going to get back to it until much later. And by then you have to rely on your monitoring and observability tooling to like capture the production incident and fix it instead of like earlier on in the pipeline. So I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts. I don't know. I'm curious what other folks are seeing.
So I guess like the QA side of things is something that usually probably gets overlooked a little bit at the beginning or at the start of any sort of, you know, software company. It's usually not one of the first things that people think of, but I mean, to, you know, follow up on Nick's point, having a good process in place, you know, at the start of that is going to prevent you from having to deal with issues at the, you know, once stuff is in production. Like no one wants to get a call at, you know, 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that, or have an alert go off at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, your entire site is down because of some error that could have been caught a lot farther up in the process. So I think it's super important. And it's just one of those things that I think tends to kind of get overlooked and shouldn't be. So.
Awesome. Cool. Any other input? All right, sweet. We'll move on to the,
Yeah, so at Lita, we're actually still in development and we're fully going to launch in fall of next year. So all of, you know, what you guys were saying is actually really helpful in our processes as we build that Q&A towards the end of this year.
cool. All right. So more general question here. What would you guys say the most rewarding part of working at a startup is for you guys? This one goes out to everyone.
I can start that one. So for me, the most rewarding part is you see what you worked on being directly used by whoever the end customer is or the end user is. So you're a lot closer to that, you know, person, I feel like, working at a startup than you are probably at, you know, a larger organization. So like me personally, like I have direct relationships with the end users of our product, and I can see how it benefits them, how it's benefiting their organization. And, you know, getting that type of feedback from them is, you know, that's rewarding to me, just to see that happen.
Yeah, piggybacking on that, Carl, I think you get to show ownership a lot faster and earlier than you would if you had a lot of coworkers above you in like the software development food chain, so to speak, right? Like even if you're 2 weeks into a company, if you show an interest in something, that's usually enough. If you're interested in it, you get to help own it. So, and like I said, you know, sometimes I can come back and bite you if you're not quite prepared for that. But broadly speaking, it's pretty rewarding. And on a personal level, I do think working at a startup is something that's really good for every software engineer at some point in their career, because it will pretty much kick out imposter syndrome from your head, right? Like there's just not room for imposter syndrome when you're at a startup. Like no one is an expert and everyone is an expert. It's a lot easier to just chuck it out the window. When you have a lot of coworkers in software, like at a bigger company, it can be really easy to defer to them for technical things, or to feel like you never have enough authority to sign up for a panel or something like that, right? There's always somebody higher up that's not present at a startup. So I found that to be really personally rewarding.
I don't know if, to be honest, I don't know if my imposter syndrome has gotten kicked
No,
yet.
it hasn't gotten kicked? We'll work on that, Nick.
I mean, I don't know. It's like getting comfortable with like saying I don't know a whole lot, and
Yeah.
like, but um, for me, the most rewarding part, especially at the startup, is like the mission. Like like I said earlier, I deeply, deeply care about like like improving accessibility and care of mental health, and like I really feel grateful that I get to work on this problem, um, especially like right now with what's going on over the course of this year. And what Carl was saying, and what Andrew was saying too, like having like clear company level impact. And like at like a much larger company, you might like move a smaller part of it, and like that's nice. But like when you get to like work on problems that increase the like total like surface area, or the total like volume, like the total pie size, like I think that's really fun.
Yeah, I agree with every single, one of you where I think the most rewarding part of working at a startup is that the fact that you learn so much outside of your designated role. Like within Lida, we have so many different moving parts. There's the technology, the product, but there's also the lobbying side, the regulatory side. There's the medical side. We're a for-profit company, so there's the venture capital side. Learning how to raise capital as a female founder, that has been quite an experience. Learning, how the political system works, that has been another whole experience. Learning how to do like everything from scratch, that's a journey that I think it's just an invaluable learning experience. And one of the things that I actually love to do at Lida when hiring interns and individuals is I ask them, one, what is your background? What are you good at? What do you feel confident in working on? And the second thing is, what is an area that you don't have any experience in, but you would like to gain experience in, that's completely unrelated to your background? So, there's so many different moving parts, and I try to make sure that they're working on something that they're good at, but at the same time, they're also getting the opportunity to work on something that they had no experience in. So when they, come out, they know more than when they came in.
Awesome. Yeah, those are all really, really cool things. Just I know from working this sort of myself, it is definitely rewarding. And I agree with Nick, the imposter syndrome. I don't know if it's gone away yet, but hopefully.
Yeah, so maybe I need to figure out what happened with me, but I don't know. I hit a point where I was like, nope. Well, nobody else in the room knows how to do this, but we need to do it. So I guess I'm now the expert. And then I just took that and ran with it. But
yeah. So I guess to kind of switch it up, what would be the least rewarding or the worst part of working at a startup that you guys have found? Or just the most difficult, maybe?
I can take that one first. So we are a company tackling sexual assault. It is not an easy topic for a lot of people. We are currently doing our first fundraise as a company. We're almost about to close our round, and in trying to do our first fundraise and having all these conversations with venture capitalists and investors, having conversations about sexual assault like 15 hours a day, every single day for a year. I guess that has been, you meet a lot of different kinds of people, and the reactions you receive, the sometimes insensitive questions you receive, that has been a little challenging, but at the same time, you just learn how to deal with it at one point. So that's my experience with sort of like the worst parts. But then again, everything is a learning experience.
the context switching was very hard on me. When, for 2 months, the executive team was like going real hard for a new product or a new capability within the product. And then like they would have 2 meetings and they'd change their mind. The development work that went into that, having to just like toss it all out, or not toss it all out, but put it to the side for a little while, and totally change gears. That was hard. I think I got better at it as time went by. You learned to like, not personalize, your relationship with your latest code. but it definitely led to some burnout. I think it's natural to feel like, you put hours in and you want to see it go somewhere to good. So it can be hard. And I think it's a normal part of a startup, right? They have to pivot, they're figuring things out. And you have to learn to work with that. I do think it might be a little bit harder when you're in there, like writing the lines of code or writing the tool set, to just be like, yeah, okay, we'll toss that out. So I still have not learned that skill, but I've gotten a little bit better about it. And that was hard for me. And managing 10 priorities all at the same time. I became like made fun of at my office for always quoting that Chinese proverb, like the person who chases two rabbits catches neither. I used to say that to them so much that they would actually quote me before I said it. Because that was my way of being like, pick 2 or 3 priorities for me, not 10. But that was hard.
So I don't have the same proverb, but something I say is one of Picard's quotes of one impossible thing at a time. And I think the context switching for me is similar, but it's more nuanced for me, where it's like context switching of different modes of thinking. Like where if I'm using like going from like coding to like process thinking to strategy thinking to like tactical like delivery road mapping thinking all in the course of like one day or something, like I'm just like, oh man, I'm tired after this. But I mean, I don't know. I think the worst part could like, I mean, I don't experience this, but like something I think Wendy, you were saying earlier around like the people and how the team is feeling, like it like magnifies itself, right? So if the team isn't feeling well, then like, and you're not like shipping regularly or whatever, like that takes a toll on you, and then like that's less fun. But I don't know.
I actually don't really have anything to add, and to be honest with you, I like the environment. I like what I do. I just don't really have anything to add to this one. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of that stuff. So, so I know Wendy kind of touched on it earlier, but as a smaller engineering team, you guys have a lot more autonomy, and there's definitely more differences in opinion. I feel like when you're with a smaller team sometimes, and I feel like sometimes it's harder to resolve those conflicts because there's not just somebody at the top saying this is what's going to be done and just do it. So have you guys found like, resolving those conflicts and working to a compromise on different engineering decisions?
I'm actually really excited to jump in. So I think it comes down to your operating values and trusting your peers and your teammates. Like I can really largely just speak to like how we make those sorts of decisions at Modern Health, and like we're a really collaborative team, and like one of the company values that I love is like embracing the journey. And like it's like, yeah, things are gonna be hard, we might not know everything, but we have to try. And like one of the ways that we like show that value is through this like improv skill called like yes anding. I don't know if folks are familiar with improv, but yes and is a affirmative thing that like moves the conversation forward. And like I think that this encourages us to like try things and resolve sort of those like differences of opinion, where it's like, yeah, like I trust you, like I assume best intentions, like yes, I hear that thing and maybe consider this thing, but being unafraid to disagree and commit, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but like you don't want like time is incredibly valuable, and so your efficiency in decision making is really important. So as long as you're bringing it back to your values and everyone's operating similarly, like that's what's important to me, I think, and helps make it easier.
We also found it to be really helpful to do like very structured brainstorming for design or architecture choices. Because if you left it very open-ended, like what should the design be for this new product, or how do we want to lay out the next API? Then usually it would default to whoever had been in a position of design before would step in again. And that was also problematic when you hired new people who also considered themselves an expert in that, right? So we had that problem where, like, when we were a very small team, no issue at all. We had one person who loved to take the lead. We were all comfy letting that person take the lead. We implemented, it was great. But when we hired other people who also thought of themselves as the expert in that, sometimes there were personality conflicts. And part of it is just naturally like get to know each other more as people, and it'll be a little bit easier to resolve technical disagreements. But also something that was very helpful was structured brainstorming, where you weren't allowed to criticize or edit or put on like a critical thinking hat for an idea for like 20 minutes. Instead, we would just tell the team, we've got 20 minutes, we need 30 ideas. Or we've got 30 minutes, we want 5 different architectures that could solve this problem. You can't edit them, you just put them out. Something like that was very helpful for the team to say, like, it's this many minutes, we want this many ideas or designs to come out of it, and you're not allowed to edit as you go. Removing that editor thinking was pretty helpful. It helped some of the pointier personalities who wanted to own the design. It helped them open up a little bit to accepting ideas from other people, because it was in that very structured environment. And they got to lead the structured environment meeting, so that was also a good technique.
Awesome. Any other input on that one?
We at Lita, whenever we come up with, we've actually scraped our front end a couple of times and completely redesigned it. We actually rebranded the entire company earlier this year as well. And in doing that, we completely redid the interface at least twice. But whenever we do something like that, what we have found helpful is that as soon as we have a working prototype, even in terms of just, you know, something in Adobe XD, we send it out to our stakeholders to test. And we also send out a little survey that our designers, the engineers, they all, you know, jump in on and then create and try to understand any pain points that they thought where they couldn't pick, you know, if they want to go with process A or B, and you put that in there and really understand what our stakeholders feel before we move forward in actually building out the entire processes. That has been really helpful to our team, at least.
Just to kind of piggyback off that, you know, comment about, you know, sending something out to stakeholders and using that as what you're going to drive to make your decisions. So I think that is something extremely important. So whether stakeholders are, you know, your internal people, or listening to your customer feedback and driving the changes that you're making based on their feedback, and, you know, actually listening to the problems they're having and how your solution can kind of fit in there and how it can, you know, help them, I think is an important type of mindset for people that they need to kind of be in that. And, you know, that's something that we really focus on, is we let the feedback we get from our customers kind of drive the changes we're making, and, you know, distilling it and, you know, determining which things make sense for us to do. But ultimately, we're making changes based on feedback we're hearing from people that are actually using it. Because we may think something completely different internally, and then when people that are actually using the software are using it, they might have a completely different way of doing it, or a completely different type of feedback. So I think that that's a, you know, important aspect or important point that, you know, should be made.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, guys. So, I mean, those are all the questions I had for you. You guys kind of touched on the last one I had, which was about context switching and kind of burning out. So unless there's any input on that, I'd like to open it up to anyone else in the chat. If you guys have any questions at all for any of the panelists, just turn on your mic, ask, or send it in the chat, and I'll ask them.
So it's a bit lame for a question to come from a panelist, but I do have a question for my other panelists if they're game. Particularly Lisa and Carl, I have a question for you guys. What's the best thing that someone can do who does not work at your company to support you as a founder, like in a 5-minute conversation with someone or a 10-minute conversation with someone? Is there anything that stood out as consistently helpful that you get from strangers or from acquaintances?
Let me take that first because we are such an early stage company. We've only been in existence for a little over a year now. I think the most helpful thing to us at this point or at this stage is if you know someone who might have had an experience with sexual assault, or if you know that someone is going through something, please, please, please point them towards us. Right now, we might not have launched, but we have the resources to help a lot of survivors who might be going through some shits, right? We've connected survivors with pro bono legal supports, pro bono support groups, and especially during this year, sexual assault is actually not going down, it's going up. So if you know someone who is going through something and needs help, is afraid, is scared, can't talk to anyone about it, hasn't done anything, please send them towards my way. I'll make sure they receive the help that they need in whatever shape or form that is.
So I think for me, like, I enjoy having conversations with people that are in similar role, like in a similar role to me. So like technical people that have, you know, some similar experiences, and, you know, listening to them and learning from them. So it doesn't matter what it is, but I like people and, you know, seeing what I can learn from those conversations. I know that's a very general statement, but I don't know. I feel like you can learn listening to other people's experiences, because we very well could have the same type of problems, and, you know, went about it could be completely different than the way that I was thinking about going about it. And I think that that's a, you know, it's a good type of conversation to have.
Anything else from anybody else? Well, if not, thank you guys so much, all of our panelists, as well as everyone who's attended. Appreciate it. I think it's been a discussion.